Weeds is a show about plants. Plants that I can't describe in the first 60 seconds if I don't want YouTube stealing my rent.
Don't get freaked out when I just all of a sudden flip it upside down and distort, add borders, and pixelate.
So Weeds is about plants that you put in paper, or glass if you're fancy. Then you light it on fire and suddenly Family Guy is way funnier than you remember it being.
Peter.
The story is set in the early 2000s and centers around Nancy Botwin, a recent widow in the affluent hills of Los Angeles, California. Having recently lost her husband, Nancy is left to manage raising her boys, Shane and Silas, in the wealthy neighborhood of Agrestic. The show is a commentary on the lifestyle of the upper class and how their glossy, polished exterior often belies a much seedier underbelly. Even the show's title is a thinly veiled jab at the neighborhoods that Agrestic represents. Cookie-cutter communities that spring up like weeds and tend to have an overall negative effect on the surrounding areas, all while their residents bemoan anyone who isn't them as lower class, dirty, or lesser than. Weeds was created by Genji Kohan. You might know her as the creator of Orange is the New Black, or as a supporter of a nation that plays tic-tac-toe with bomb strikes on Palestinians. So yeah, not a good look on her. The show released to critical acclaim, but as it went on, it became less and less recognizable. The snarky, biting edge of the earlier seasons became washed with contrived plots and shallow characters. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Today, we're only looking at the first season, so consider this Chapter 1. If you want to see me talk about the rest of the show, make sure to leave a like, drop a comment, and hit the subscribe button for more.
And a blue one and a yellow one, and they're all made out of ticky-tacky, and they all look just the same.
The season opens on a PTA meeting at Agrestic Elementary. Nancy Botwin, played by Mary Louise Parker, is debating Celia Hodes, played by Elizabeth Perkins, on the removal of soft drinks from the school's vending machines.
So many of our girls are watching their way.
Our oldest girls are 11. They shouldn't be dieting.
Meanwhile, the other moms gossip about the recent death of Nancy's husband, Judah. Immediately, we get the vibe of the community. Vanity hidden beneath a thin veil of pleasantries.
My husband dropped dead. I'd suck out, lift up, and inject anything that moved.
I know.
The ladies judge Nancy for her expensive-looking bag, wondering where her money is truly coming from.
It's a knockoff, but you can't even tell.
Let me see that. Ray shipment want one of these.
Straight from the kitchen of Halia James, Nancy trades words with Halia and her family, consisting of Conrad, Vanita, and Keon. They talk about the unfair division of wealth, racial stereotypes, and Nancy's business. Turns out Nancy is responsible for bringing weed to the Botox-filled lips of Agrestic. The hookup was provided by Nancy's brother-in-law, Andy. But the relationship between Nancy and the family is deeper than just weed. Halia expresses grief for Nancy's loss, and Conrad cares for Nancy deeply, as evidenced by him walking Nancy to her car. We also learn that Nancy's husband died while on a jog with her son, Shane, whom we meet in this next scene. The family dynamic is tense, and we're introduced to Lapita, the maid, Silas, the eldest son, and Quinn Hodes, Celia Hodes' daughter. Some of you may recognize Silas as Hunter Parrish, but I recognize him as Stan from 17 again.
Stan has a small wiener.
You got fucked up!
While Nancy is caught up running weed and making her money, she fails to be attentive to what happens beneath her own roof, like Silas's acting out with Quinn and Shane falling into a hole of violent TV shows and media.
Turn the show back on.
There's a huge hole in the ceiling. What the hell were you doing up there?
Peter told him to get down.
I tell you, Mrs.
I didn't hear her.
Nancy meets with Josh, a neighborhood kid who deals to his own crowd, but Nancy has concerns about him potentially dealing to younger children.
You don't deal to kids. Are we clear?
They're too young to bleed, they're too young for weed. No grass in the field, no grass will they yield.
You're a poet.
He promises not to, and as he leaves, we get this funny juxtaposition of a drug deal in the parking lot of a prissy high school with a self-serving motto on the marquee. This show loves to use caricatures to its advantage. Like take Nancy. Nancy is a PTO mom driving a Range Rover who also happens to be slinging weed to the neighborhood. We get to meet Celia's daughter Isabel in the next scene at a soccer game. Celia resents her due to her being overweight. Celia is also a dedicated backseat parent. She offers advice about Shane and Silas.
No, you've got to tough it out, little man. See, that's what your father would have said.
How about this? How about you relax?
Doug, the city council treasurer and father of Josh, meets with Nancy for his own buy, and Nancy shoos him off discreetly. Shane gets picked on by Devin, another boy on the soccer team, but Nancy stands up for him.
Honey, you really need to watch where you're going.
And this is something that I love about Nancy's character, especially in the earlier seasons. Because at this point, despite her absenteeism due to her dealing, Nancy still has clear love and dedication to her family. Nancy will stand up for her own kids and even kids who aren't hers.
Did you see my kick?
Yeah, I want to see more running out there, Isabelle.
Kick was great, Isabel. I love you.
Silas and Quinn are trying to figure out where to have sex when Shane stumbles onto them while running from Devin. Nancy confronts Doug in the parking lot and warns him to not be smoking so publicly. She collects money that Doug owes her and they gossip, mostly about how Celia's husband, Dean, is cheating on her. Nancy then confronts Josh about how he's dealing to children, and once again, we get to see Nancy's firm moral code. She stands up to Josh, vehemently disagreeing with the idea of dealing to children.
I'm selling to whoever's buying, okay?
No.
We get to see both sides of the moral dilemma, with Josh arguing that Nancy is a hypocrite, being a mother who's also dealing. I like these kinds of moments in the writing because the show attempts to represent all sides of an issue. It's realistic because, in real life, people get defensive, people have differing points of view, and people will stand up for what they believe in. We then get this raw moment where Nancy discusses teenage sexuality with Quinn. Nancy grapples with the thought of her son maturing and ponders on how little she truly knows. Her naivety is further evidenced when she catches Josh and her neighbor being sexual in a pool together. She uses this as leverage to keep Josh from dealing to children further. This is where we get to see the lengths Nancy will go to for what she believes in. When she finds a way to get what she wants, she will plot and stop at nothing to achieve it. She will use any means necessary. As the series goes on, we'll see how this works both to Nancy's favor and her demise. We get to see Celia's parenting style further exemplified by her wanting to plant a spy camera hidden in a teddy bear to catch her daughter having sex. This is of course wrong because that's none of her business. This kind of helicopter parenting was and continues to be common, regardless of income bracket. Many of you might have even experienced this. Celia is a perfect contradiction. Her shiny cross necklace and her holier-than-thou attitude that she uses to taunt her beliefs that actively cause her children and the people around her to want to do everything but listen to her. Nancy and Celia are interesting because in many ways, they're similar. They're parents whose lives feel so out of control to them as individuals, so they both work to find ways to reclaim that missing power. Celia does it through totalitarian surveillance and biting remarks in an attempt to belittle people's confidence so that she can lord over them. Nancy does it by trying to claim her own means of production and to be self-sustaining so that she can provide for the family that she knows is damaged. What Nancy fails to consider is how her quest for control makes her lose sight of the very thing she's trying to protect. While she's out managing her deals, her son Silas is doing God knows what, Shane is diving on kids from trees and paint bombing them, and with every day, she grows further and further apart from them. I'm not saying that Silas shouldn't be having sex. He's a kid. Kids are going to experiment with their peers. Notice how I said experiment with their peers and not full-grown adults who want to take advantage of them, you fucking creeps. What Nancy takes issue with is that Silas doesn't feel comfortable talking with her about anything. And how is he supposed to when Nancy is never around to be a steady presence in his life? How do you confide in someone that's never there? Shane, absent a father, is now more dependent than ever on his mom for guidance and stability. But when she's missing, we see how he takes things into his own hands and where that leads him. The episode ends with Celia reviewing the footage from the spy camera and seeing Dean having sex with Helen Chin. Elsewhere, Nancy collapses into Conrad's arms, distraught at the way her life feels like it's spiraling. This episode as a whole is brilliant because it does great to establish each character and give us, as an audience, a firm outline of their morals. It's a strong introduction that leaves you wanting more, and that's everything a good first episode should be. And this last part has nothing to do with the overall plot, but I love the setting and all the dated references and artifacts. Devin's using a Game Boy with a link cable. The time period for this is perfect. Not just for my personal nostalgia, but also due to the public attitude about weed at this time. Weed was heavily stigmatized, even within liberal states like California, and to have a mainstream show about it that attempts to tackle weed's place in everyday life is fascinating to me. The next episode begins at one of Isabel's dance classes. Nancy is selling weed to the teacher, and Celia reveals that she sent Quinn off to boarding school in Mexico. Through dialogue with Shane, we learn that Nancy's checks are bouncing. Despite the cash she's pulling in, Nancy is struggling to maintain her lifestyle. Nancy meets with Doug to ask for advice. She can't deposit her earnings directly into her checking account. It risks a paper trail. Instead, Doug suggests using a small business as a cover. At home, we see the effects of Nancy being unable to pay her bills traditionally. Her phones and internet are both down, and she's buying her children's silence to keep them from asking questions. But even money can't keep Silas from wondering what happened to Quinn. Nancy is forced to share what she knows, and Silas flies off the hook. For all that Nancy is trying to do for her family, she's neglecting important things that directly affect them. Meanwhile, Shane reminisces about his dad by looking at old footage on a camcorder. Back at Celia's house, she gets revenge on Dean, but has yet to reveal everything that she knows. Silas confronts Celia at school, who only gets more furious when she learns her daughter had been sexually active. Celia hates her daughter's sexuality because it's another element of life that she can't control. Nancy bargains with Halia to try and get her next re-up on credit. It's a simple trade. Halia will give Nancy her next batch, but Nancy needs to leave her Rover as collateral. In the meantime, she'll be driving Conrad's car.
Public Radio International. This is the world.
Leave it to the white lady to bump NPR in the wagon. Nancy crashes Doug and Dean's poker game to deliver more weed, and she runs into Celia in the parking lot. They share a dialogue about how there are no secrets in Agrestic.
I know you know. Everybody knows. There are no secrets in this town.
Maybe a few.
None. What? None. You're having money problems. Our children had sex. Judy Gordon orders OxyContin over the internet and has developed quite the habit.
Jesus loves you, Judy?
Jesus loves you, Judy. Loves her hillbilly heroine. But you didn't hear that from me. I don't like gossip.
Oh my God. Stop fucking lying.
I like this because it really does show how no one is safe in these nosy, closed neighborhoods. Everyone is in everyone's business, and everyone has a dark side. Silas is still torn up over Quinn, but I can understand, as to him, it's indicative of a bigger trend. Judah, Quinn, even Nancy, everyone in Silas's life is either missing or just seems to disappear. And how does that not stick with a kid? When you have nothing constant in your life, what do you have left to depend on? Outside, Shane takes a fall and the hospital bill eats into Nancy's profit. Halia demands more collateral, and this time, that means Nancy's rings. Nancy forfeits her stones and leaves with a bag, but Halia isn't so cold-hearted. She refuses to sell the rings. This is where we get more depth to Halia's character. She's determined, she's got a good head on her shoulders, and she's a shrewd businesswoman, but she's far from heartless. For the people that she cares about, she has a lot of love and compassion. Celia confronts Helen Chin and they discuss Dean's infidelity. It's here we learn the depths of Celia's struggle. Celia resents Dean not purely based on what he did, but because of what it makes her. She expected more, and now, by association, she has fallen alongside him. And Celia struggles to grapple with this, but rather than sorting through her emotions in depth, she would rather pretend the problem doesn't exist. She even says so herself.
He's just not what I thought he'd be, you know? He just turned out to be another mid-level asshole. And that makes me Mrs. Mid-level Asshole. And now I have to fucking deal with it, and I don't like dealing with things. I'd much prefer to pretend they don't exist.
This is a trend that spans across all of her actions. Celia doesn't want to see Isabel, so she keeps her in extracurriculars so that she doesn't have to be reminded of Isabel's weight. Celia ships off Quinn because she fears her independence and sexuality. Celia hates Dean, but refuses to confront him because she's too attached to her lifestyle, so instead, she seeks to get even in other ways. After Nancy gets spotted by Celia without her ring and fancy car, she spends time at home and takes her latent frustration out through alcohol and smashing Shane's camera. The episode ends with Judah signing off.
Say goodnight, Dad, and shut off the camera.
Good night, Dad.
If I am alive this time next year.
The episode begins with a news report stating that there's a mountain lion on the loose in Agrestic. Nancy goes to deliver to Doug, but he reveals that he's all full up. You see, he's recently gotten a medical marijuana card, thanks to California Prop 215. This poses a serious threat to Nancy's business. If people are able to obtain weed through legal channels, they'll have no need for Nancy's services. Nancy pays a visit to the dispensary, but back then, they were better known as provisioning centers or caregivers clubs. She's overwhelmed by the sheer amount of supplies and services offered. Now aware of the sheer variety and quality of products available, Nancy takes up her grievances with Halia. But Halia is no stranger to the danger of cannabis clubs. They've cut into her business as well. Nancy, tired of her sub-quality goods, demands better from Halia, but it comes at a heavy price, one that Nancy can't necessarily afford right now. She leaves with a significantly lighter load, but Conrad gives her a tip on the way out.
You can use that skank to cook with.
Then it is skank.
Elsewhere, Shane gears up to hunt the mountain lion, and Celia is busy raiding Isabel's secret food stashes and replacing them with laxatives. I think this goes without saying, but laxative abuse to lose weight is terribly unhealthy and puts you at serious risk for dehydration, among other things, which can be deadly. Unless you're trying to do the CPS speed run, don't do this to your kid.
You don't want to be like this. This is disgusting.
In another part of town, Silas is partying when he encounters a deaf girl named Megan. What he thinks is a sexual liaison quickly turns into a prank, and Silas leaves ashamed.
Oh! Shit, what the fuck are you doing?
Let's see here, it says in my script, obvious she blew him joke, segue to next paragraph. Later that night, Conrad teaches Nancy to cook edibles over the phone. It's an effort to give her more bang for her buck. Edibles are far more potent and much more discreet. Oh my god, the old DS, she's a real one. Shane claims he shot the mountain lion, and Silas stumbles back into the kitchen, suspicious of Nancy's latest cooking venture. Isabel suffers the consequences of her mother's insecurity when she has an accident in class. Dean attempts to comfort Isabel, and while he may not be the best, he's certainly a much better parent than Celia. When he expresses his concern to Celia, she openly admits that she planted the laxatives on Isabel. And Dean says everything that I'm thinking.
Are you out of your fucking mind?
What? Calm down.
Isabel overhears the conversation through the walls and quickly gets to work plotting her revenge. Whatever love Celia thinks that she's showing to Isabel is sorely misguided, evil, and downright cruel. I don't have a transition for this next line.
Have you ever had sex with a woman?
Excuse me.
This is another one of Celia's power struggles. She wants to get revenge on Dean, but on her own terms, and even when she tries, she creates roadblocks to put in her own way. Celia also mentions that the Elderman's cat is missing, leading Nancy to be concerned that Shane killed it. What was I talking about before? Oh yeah, swimming in the waters of creation.
Sick of men. Maybe I missed my calling. And what if I was supposed to be a dick, but just made a wrong turn by mistake?
Oh, whoa now, this is weeds, not the L word. That's gonna be a separate video. Nancy brings her baked goods to Dean and Doug's poker game, and sells the guys on the benefits. No smell, safe on the lungs, and satisfies the munchies. They're an instant hit. Silas also manages to apologize to Megan, and Nancy confronts Shane. When asking why Shane did what he did, he expresses that he did it for Judah's sake. Shane is chasing masculinity and pride. He wants to be valuable to his family and do right by his father. And because he lacks healthy role models to teach him ways to achieve this, it leads him to act out in more and more dangerous ways. Nancy makes right on most of her debt with Halia, but she's still a little short of roving again. She thanks Conrad for the recipe and Wait, where did Conrad go? Oh, I see. Helia whooped his ass into next week. Alright, he'll be back on Thursday. At night, Isabel's revenge on Celia is moving right along, and Celia is moving nothing along as she spends the night on the toilet in agony. The final scene sees the family gathered around the TV at night. This is the first time so far in the series that we're getting to see the whole family spending time together uninterrupted. Nancy catches a glimpse of the lion out the window and notices something. A BB gun wound, right beneath its eye. Shane wasn't lying. The cat walks off and the episode comes to a close. At the beginning of episode 4, we're introduced to Andy Botwin, Nancy's eccentric brother-in-law. A few things are apparent right off the bat. Andy's very devil-may-care, like he just got back from Alaska, he lives his life off the radar, and he tends to coast off of his good looks and charm. But Andy's definitely attentive and caring for his family. He comes bearing gifts, he talks to Silas on a one-on-one level, and he has a very strong love in his heart. He also tells the boys a story about how he tried to capitalize on the fashion of the Christ trend, but ended up with a whole lot of Chris.
Chris died for your sins. Is that a joke?
Yeah, on me. That's what happens when you outsource to f***ing Malaysia. 8-year-olds in the sweatshop can't spell for shit.
In Helia's kitchen, Nancy complains about Andy's sudden presence interfering with her business. To remedy this, Helia gives Nancy a connection to someone called the Candyman. Back at home, Andy is getting baked at Silas's computer, and when Megan sends an IM to Sext, Andy engages. Less than 10 minutes of screen time for a charming character to become a sex predator. Is that a new record? Doug takes Nancy to a restaurant. They're doing location scouting for Nancy's cover business. Lupita catches Andy doing the one-handed special and gives him a phone call from Shane. The two set up a business peddling the misprinted Jesus shirts outside of Shane's school, but they get run off by the principal. We get this scene at the PTA that serves as a commentary on the religious crowd.
It's a stupid t-shirt. We should ignore it.
Only one man died for my sins, Nancy, and his name wasn't Chris.
Because these communities are usually filled with far-right Christians, it makes sense that they would be flying off the hook at anything they could interpret as blasphemy. Nancy takes a phone call and meets with the Candyman played by Jane Lynch, a dealer obsessed with body image and weight. While Nancy is picking up Candyman's edibles, Andy learns that Nancy has been dealing when Helia misinterprets a visit from Andy as a pickup for Nancy. Andy confronts Silas about his interaction with Megan and apologizes, but he suggests Silas move things forward with Megan. Silas fears that by being sexual with her, he's taking advantage of a disabled person, but Andy comes in with strangely humanizing advice. He expresses that Silas's views only further social stigma, and if he really wants her to feel like they're on the same level, he shouldn't treat her any differently. Andy also confronts Nancy about her dealing and expresses that he wants to stay around and help her. While Nancy is out doing business, Andy can make sure that the kids are looked after so that Nancy doesn't leave her children completely neglected.
Whatever you think about me, Judah was my brother. And I have your back. Now I'm gonna go inside, and I'm gonna finish cooking dinner for the family.
This is what I like about Andy. For all of his eccentricity, he finds ways to have a good head on his shoulders. Anyways, they didn't know how to end this episode, so Silas shares a romantic evening with Megan, a plane drops its payload through Dean and Celia's roof, and Celia has cancer.
I have cancer.
We didn't write an ending.
Was that a lot? That's okay, we'll unpack it in the next episode. At the beginning of the episode, Shane is in trouble at school. He's been venting his feelings through music, and it's been concerning to his teachers.
You made a lot of people around the school very nervous.
Yeah, that's because they're a bunch of bitch-ass white boys.
I hate to break this to you, but you're also a bitch-ass white boy.
Dean is talking to his lawyer to try and get compensation for the damage to his roof, titty sniffing for cancer, and Incredihose.
The Incredihose.
Incredihose.
Silas's friends are trying to convince him to break up with Megan just because she's deaf? But deaf people are awesome. Look at the cool things you can do with ASL. Andy and Doug bond over porn and weed and have a heated discussion about taint versus runway. I'm Team Taint, #Team Taint. Nancy goes to Halia's and gets caught in a drive-by while she's there. It's here that the depth of what Nancy is doing sets in. She asks for the police, but Halia reminds her of just where she is. Naturally, the police wouldn't care about a shooting at a drug dealer's house, and the police also tend not to care when the people in danger are black. Doug drops off the papers for Nancy's bakery, but Nancy refuses to sign them. She tells Andy that if he really wants to do this, he should do it on his own. Celia shows up to the PTA meeting and spits in the face of everyone. Slowly, Celia is falling out of the social hierarchy in pursuit of her own motives. The bootlicking crowd is no longer serving Celia's needs, so she says, "I'm about to pop this bean and forget my name, f*** you bitches."
Drinking lean tone and standoffs.
Andy stops at Halia's so he can start selling his own product, but he gets pulled over while leaving. Back at school, Silas learns a hard lesson about sticking with the people who actually care about you versus chasing immediate gratification. He tries to make it up to Megan, but she isn't having any of it. At the courthouse, the lawyer that's getting Andy off gives Nancy some good advice about the current legal climate of weed and offers her services for the future.
Marijuana currently exists in a legal gray area. It's not illegal to have weed, less than an ounce, that is, Andrew, but it's illegal to buy it.
Bro, what are you talking about, man?
What if the marijuana is in baked goods, say candy or chocolate?
If you can eat it, you can beat it.
Nancy and Celia bond over drinks. That's nice. Celia flashes Silas. That's gratuitous. And the episode ends here. You ever been so horny that you steal the smoke alarm batteries? Well, that's how this episode starts. Andy attends anti-drug classes as part of his court sentence, where he falls for one of his classmates, Sharon. Andy turns the class into Male Manipulator 101 and makes up a story about his stepfather to get Sharon to sponsor him. Through a conversation with Lupita and her friend, we learn that Nancy's business is quickly stepping onto cartel territory. Shane is making a video where he acts like a terrorist. There's no clever analysis here, this is just strange. Megan comes to make up with Silas, and Andy catches them smoking, but nothing comes of it. We also get this sweet moment with Silas and Megan where he encourages her to speak with her real voice instead of relying on text.
How do you know? You can't hear it. Listen, come on. I promise you, it'll be okay.
Okay, well, it's kinda sweet. His heart's in the right place. Meanwhile, Conrad helps Nancy plot out how to set up her business, and Celia makes a date with him. The three of them go out dancing, and Nancy catches the eye of a local player, Tusk. The two discuss family and what it's like living the lives that they've chosen.
Do you have any kids?
I do. 2 boys and a girl.
I have 2 boys. I'm not with them enough. What am I doing?
You're doing what all of us are doing, baby. You're getting by.
Andy fakes being on the brink of falling off the wagon in order to get Sharon to come over. While they talk, Lupita stumbles upon Nancy's stash while playing with Shane. Wow, this seems like a really tense moment. Hey, why is my sex montage alarm going off?
Maybe sunshine and maybe it'll bring my love to any better than I.
Nancy sees Shane's video and discusses what to do about it with Andy. Andy is of the school of thought that this is Shane's cry for attention, and it makes sense. The boy had to watch his dad die in front of him, and now all he wants to do is make sure his mom sees him because he's scared she's gonna disappear too. The episode ends with Nancy bonding with Shane and then crying to herself as she reflects on a video of her and Judah. Funny how simpler times can seem so far away in moments like these.
Feel you tumbling down into that empty room, the lights went out. I wanna rescue, wanna scream aloud.
Nancy is on the college campus looking for a tutor for Silas, but something else catches her eye, a whole new market of clients. Celia is in the hospital for her breast surgery and Andy is back home, or should I address him by his professional title, MILF Killa.
We've got an hour.
Celia's mother shows up, and it's immediately clear where Celia gets it from. Her comments about Isabel's hair and her overbearing opinions on everything. It's a great study on generational trauma and how Celia absorbed the damage that her mother gave her and continued to pass it on to her family and those around her. When Nancy sees an opportunity in Silas's new tutor, Sanjay, she immediately puts him to work helping with her business, and the two start making ends with the local students. At the re-up, Halia gives Nancy important advice about organization and discretion. Nancy gets to work making Sanjay bring on subordinates and supplying them all with disposable phones. Business is booming, but it's painting a target on Nancy's back, as evidenced by someone scuffing her car with pennies and this ominous shot of her being watched through binoculars. At the Hodes household, the family takes a stand against Celia's mom and locks her out. Nancy returns home to congratulate Shane on a successful science test when there's a knock on the door. Nancy opens it only to be greeted with a copper calling card. Someone's watching, and they're getting closer. Nancy closes the door and the episode fades out. Are these chapters seeming a little brief? Well, it's hard to get complex analysis out of multiple scenes of gratuitous sex and throwaway gags. The B-plot for this episode was that the MILF from earlier is a biter during sex, so Andy has to deal with it until all the biting gives him erectile dysfunction as a trauma response. So yeah, really substantial programming I'm working with here. Next episode. The episode opens on the family having Judah's tombstone unveiling. Andy gives a speech, and to deal with his existential dread, Doug and him go to smoke up, only to realize there's a rat problem in the house. They tear the place apart trying to chase it down. Celia reveals that she cheated on Dean, and the two fight over their infidelity, but it expands into a greater discussion on Celia's overall dissatisfaction. She's fed up with this stuffy neighborhood and their prefab house.
Get it all out. We should have had this conversation months ago.
Years ago.
14 years.
We've been married for 16.
Yes, but I liked the first 2.
Nancy takes Shane to a karate tournament where Shane bites his opponent Tim to get an advantage. Nancy apologizes profusely to his father, and charmed by him, they go on a family dinner date. The man's name is Peter, and things get awkward when Peter starts to ask about what Nancy does for a living. The conversation spirals downward, and Peter eventually reveals that he is single because his other wife left him for another man. Meanwhile, the dealer whose territory that Nancy is encroaching on shows up at the family door to deliver another warning. Doug and Andy spend the night wrapped up in hijinks, while Nancy and Peter get vulnerable with each other over drinks. Hey, where'd you guys as kids go? Are you just letting them wander off into the night while you get wasted at the hotel bar? Nancy returns home with the family, blissfully unaware she's being watched. She goes inside to deal with Andy, and Lupita gives her the roll of pennies. Nancy steps outside to meet with the dealer, and they drive to an alley a few blocks down. Alejandro is the man's name, and he's upset that Nancy is taking his crowd at the university. The tension in the air is thick. How will Nancy get her way out of the— oh, they're just going to f*** in the alley of a Michael's.
Oh my God, bro. Oh, hell no, man.
And then she threatens his dick with a gun. This is the kind of complex problem solving that this show is based on. At a stoplight on the way home, Nancy starts to break down again. She can feel her life spiraling further, and her new proximity to Peter isn't necessarily helpful. But Peter calls Nancy and lets her know that it doesn't have to be anything serious, and he'll be there when she's ready. Wow, what a nice, understanding man. Surely he will do nothing to make me regret saying these kind things about him. The episode opens with Andy and Nancy talking about Shane's recent incident. Shane's psychologist wants to put him on antidepressants. And Shane says, "Fuck yeah, I love pills, what flavors they got?" Celia has begun her chemo, and Weeds accurately represents how the worst people on Earth end up in healthcare.
You see Survivor last night?
With the guy who ate the chipmunk?
No, that's Fear Factor. Survivor's on the island.
Guys, how about concentrating on this Survivor for a minute?
It won't be long, Prince. I want my own franchise.
I don't blame you.
Excuse me, sir.
It won't be long.
When Nancy goes to make a drop to Sanjay, she's detained by the head of campus security. He lets her off with a warning, but takes every last bit of Nancy's supply. Once again, she's dry, broke, and desperate. I love the acting in this scene. Mary Louise Parker's facial expressions as Nancy are great. She treads slowly from this fake polite smile right onto the verge of tears, and the contrast between that smile and the pain in her eyes really drives the scene home. Celia returns to the PTA to find out she's been ousted due to her recent absences for chemo, and Maggie, the new leadership, is on a warpath. Nancy pleads with Halia for a resupply, but Halia hits Nancy with the cold water. She got jacked. The security guard was most likely a dealer himself trying to get a big supply for free. And Nancy's troubles keep piling up as Shane gets in trouble at school for starting a fire with Judah's lighter. Nancy tries desperately to get the bakery up and running as it's all she has left. Sanjay shows up, eager to make amends for the failure at Valley State. At the PTA, Celia surprises incumbent Maggie with a gift. You see, due to a recent acquisition of property from neighboring community Summer Canyon, Maggie's house is no longer in the district, so she is no longer eligible to hold power. Alejandro shows up to offer Nancy a business opportunity. He'll provide connection, distribution, and protection, as long as Nancy can supply the product. When Nancy mentions that she has no supply after she got robbed, Alejandro simply leaves her to mull over his offer. Silas lashes out at Shane. You see, the lighter that Shane used earlier was actually a gift from Judah to Silas. So he lays him out on the kitchen floor, but this isn't really a flex, Silas. You just bodied a 10-year-old. That's like me saying I want a foot race against a toddler. Silas seeks refuge at Megan's house, and when Nancy comes home, the security guard is there. He's a bloody mess and comes offering an apology, along with Nancy's full supply, untouched. It seems Alejandro's protection helped teach him who Nancy really is. The episode ends with a tight shot on Nancy's face. It's an expression that almost says, "This is just the beginning." The episode opens with a bombshell. It wasn't Alejandro who beat up the security guard. It was Conrad. And Helia is pissed at him. She feels that he's doing too much to save Nancy and putting everyone at risk. She orders Conrad to ignore Nancy going forward. Oh yeah, Vanita's having that baby thing. Someone should do something about that. Isabel is making the kind of friends that you kiss with, and Peter and Nancy reunite at another one of Shane's karate events where they agree to a formal date. Silas returns home after a cop finds him high on ecstasy with Megan. That's how we connect B-plots in this show. We just get everyone high and they kind of wander back home. Andy receives an army draft notice in the mail. His number has been called to serve in the war in Iraq. He goes to Doug for advice, but there's nothing he can do. The two also share a conversation about the ethicality of the war, and we get a great reflection of the public conscience at the time. One side saw the war for what it really was, an unjust invasion. The other side, which Doug represents, was content to blindly follow along so long as their lives weren't affected.
They had weapons of mass destruction. There were no weapons of mass destruction! No? Well, whatever.
Nancy goes to Helia's where she learns about what Conrad did, but when Helia outlines the no-contact order with Conrad, Nancy takes off. Peter shows up to the bakery for the date, but Nancy's still wrapped up in her own business. Peter attempts to reschedule for later and gives Nancy his address. Celia intervenes with Isabel about her new friend, Peggy, and this scene has so many lines that I don't really have words for other than wow.
You cannot become a lesbian just because you don't want to lose weight. The only girl that you should be seeing is Jenny Craig.
What?
I know.
Next scene. Silas confronts Nancy about his recent acting out and lets her know that he knows exactly what she's been doing. This is where we get to see it boil over. Silas isn't just mad about Nancy dealing, he's mad that there was no communication. And this is the sentiment that Andy expresses too. Nancy also has an important choice now. She can either keep up the facade or she can start being completely honest, and that means with everyone, Shane included. Oh yeah, Andy's B-plot is him trying to scheme up ways to get out of the draft, so he tries cutting off a toe, being gay. Eventually he settles on becoming a rabbi. Nancy calls a meeting of all of her associates. She's assembling her A-team to maximize her growth going forward. When Shane asks Nancy what's happening, it's here we get to see Nancy make her choice, which I believe can be symbolized by Lupita closing the doors on Shane. Instead of opening up further to her family, Nancy is closing herself off more and more. She's surrounded by her associates, turning a blind eye to Shane and literally shutting him out of her life. She's even running away to Peter's house for a late-night rendezvous. Nancy wakes up to use the restroom, and you know how those California nights get cold, so she grabs a jacket and... well, shit. This brings us to the end of Season 1. In my opinion, Season 1 stands as one of the stronger pilot seasons of a series that I've seen. I'm not calling it a cinematic masterpiece, but I'm saying it gets the job done well. The quick-witted writing style really adds a punch to the funny moments, but it can be a little contrived during arguments. Nobody's gonna rip witty one-liners in the middle of a serious argument in real life. And even though the pacing can get a little shaky here and there, it's held together by a cast of characters that hit close to home for a lot of us. And that's a lot of what makes the first season good. It's close to reality, or at the very least, it's empathetic to it. And it uses that emotional intelligence to inspire the dangers and plot lines throughout the show. Nancy has very real worries about her business costing her or her family their lives. She deals with punishment from local law that many people in the same situation have to deal with too. Weeds Season 1, simply put, comes in with a bang. It earns its 8 out of 10 rating from me with ease. As for the later seasons, well, you have to let me know if you want to hear about those. Make sure to leave a like and a comment letting me know if you want to see more of this series, or if you have another piece of media you want a horrible review on. It can be a movie, TV show, video game, anime, anything. And click subscribe to stay tuned for more. Whenever you're watching this, I hope you have a good rest of your day and an even better tomorrow. And I'll see you in the next episode of whatever I make. Make sure to keep up with me on socials and Discord. All of that'll be in the pinned comment. And until next time, this has been the Hotbox. Bye.
Whoops.